So today I want to talk about something called, let me get this off the screen, genocide. And I want to talk about some people called refugees. So I want you to take a second, get out your textbook, pause this video, turn to page 640. All right, so on page 640, you see this picture. Let me hit present so I can make it larger for you. So you see this picture. This would be page 640 in your book. So that first section at the top that says Highland countries. Highland countries, remember when we talked about I always go the wrong way. Try to get back on my map. Right there, the Highlands. Okay, and remember that is referencing what kind of landform? Hopefully you said like mountains and taller points in elevation. So this is the part of the world that this section is going to be talking about, or this is the part of Africa that this section is going to be talking about right there on page 640. So let me go back right here. So when it says Highland countries, it's talking about that area that was labeled the Highlands. All right. In this part of Africa, you have different ethnic groups. Okay, and ethnic groups are not the same as race. Okay, so these people that live in this area are going to be the same race. Okay, they're all African people, but they're different ethnic groups. Meaning, you've got, and I'm going to be reading right about here where it says these countries are home to two rival ethnic groups. You have one that's the majority and one that's the minority. So it's just that they both have the same race, but they have different types of lifestyles. Okay, they're kind of separated out into two different groups, and those groups are called their ethnicity. Kind of like if you went to different places in America. You know, in the South we have different ways of doing things, different words that we say than they do in the North or that they do along the West Coast. So you can kind of sort of think of it that way. So you have these different ethnic groups, and they fought each other. So, and it says right here in the 1990s, okay, you've got the government of one launching an attack on the other. And what that did was it led to genocide. So on your culture page behind divider 2 in your vocabulary words, I want you to write these two definitions. And the first one is genocide. So when you have one ethnic group that attacks another ethnic group and they're fighting, it's going to lead to mass murder, essentially. And this mass murder is called genocide. And it's mass murder of people because of their ethnicity, that they are, you know, they have different beliefs. Okay, so that's genocide. That's one word that you need to know. But I want to spend more time talking about refugees. Okay, so if I go down to this part that's talking about the Horn of Africa, and the Horn of Africa is going to be, it's going to be easier to do it this way, right here. Kind of looks like a rhinoceros horn poking out. You can think of it that way. This is the Horn of Africa. And at the Horn of Africa is this country called Somalia. Let me present it so you can see it a little bit better. Somalia. Okay, so this is the Horn of Africa. So this part that I'm about to be talking about will be in this area right in here. It'll talk about Kenya a little bit and in Somalia a little bit. Get back to there we go. So the Horn of Africa, this part down here. It's just talking about how Somalia, especially that one that's on that horn point, that country that's on that point, Somalia in particular has had the civil war going on. They've had border disputes with Ethiopia. There have been rival clans, within the country fighting each other. There's been a huge drought. And, drought means there's a lack of what? Lack of water. And when there's a lack of water, what's not going to grow? Crops are not going to grow. So once you have a drought, it's going to lead to a famine. And those words are right here. Drought is going to be a lack of water, has brought famine, which is a lack of food, to much of this country. Okay. In 1992, the U.S. tried to come in and help restore peace and get some stuff sorted, but there was no calming down this civil war in Somalia. So what that leads to is it leads to the instability. It leads to misery of the people, and you have a lot of violence because when people are hungry and thirsty, and they don't have food and they don't have water, they're going to do whatever it takes to get that. It turns into like desperation. So that leads to violence, along with the violence among the clans that weren't getting along. So it leads to people called refugees, right here, refugees. And what a refugee is someone who flees their home country for the safety of another country. So we're going to see all of these refugees trying to leave Somalia, trying to escape that instability of the government and trying to escape that drought and that famine and trying to escape the violence, all the fighting in between groups. And so these refugees, and it's not just here, there's other countries in the world where there are refugees. But since we're talking about Africa, this is going to be one of the main places where we see a ton of Somalian refugees trying to escape Somalia, and they've made their way into Kenya, which is a bordering country. So if you go to the next page, actually pause this video first and write these two definitions on your culture page. Okay, make sure you're writing them on your culture page. It should say culture vocabulary at the top. Okay, so pause it right now, write both of those, and then come back to this video. So if we continue on the next page, page 641, I want to go down to this part that says a new nation. And we want to talk about a country called Sudan. So the newest country in Africa, remember, if I look at a map of the world from 25 years ago, it's not going to look the same as a map of the world today. Things change. Countries, their borders get shaped by wars and by government decisions. So, it's possible for a new country to kind of be born. So Africa's newest country came about because of civil war. Well, back in 1956, Sudan won their independence from Egyptian and British control. So I'm going to go back to my map at the top for just a second, my political map, so I can show you where I'm talking about. So we were just talking about Somalia and how those Somalian refugees were fleeing into Kenya. Okay, and this was the Horn of Africa. Well, I'm going to move over here to Sudan. And you've heard me talk about Sudan before when I was talking about Egypt. Remember that the Nile River flows this direction. And that if the country of Sudan, builds a dam on the Nile River here, it's going to essentially cut off a lot of the water flow to Egypt. Okay, so you've heard me talk about this country before. So here's Sudan that I'm going to be talking about here on this next slide. So let me go back. Not that far. All right. So So Sudan won their independence in 1956. However, keep in mind, it was super far north, right? It was right there by Egypt, and Egypt is in North Africa. It was part of that area that we said went with the Middle East, that MENA area, MENA. And Sudan borders it to the south. Well, because it's so far north and it had that influence of the Islamic religion, you had a lot of Muslims that lived in the northern part of the country of Sudan. But further in the south of that country, people were either Christian or they followed their own traditional African religion. Okay, and so there was this clear division between Muslims and the rest of the people in the south. Well, in 1983, the national government in Sudan was controlled by Muslims, and they tried to impose Islamic law throughout the entire country. Well, people in South Sudan were like, hey, no, that's not our beliefs. We don't want to follow that law. So eventually you get this a civil war. Sorry, that keeps coming up. Eventually, a civil war right here erupted that killed nearly 2 million people. Nearly 2 million people. That's a lot. That's like the entire population of, well, not the entire population, but close to the whole population of Houston. After peace was finally reached, an election followed in which most voters in southern Sudan chose independence. So in 2011, we see the formation of the newest country, and it was called South Sudan. South Sudan. It's that last sentence. Sorry, this keeps coming up and covering it up. So I want to show you that on back up here on this political map. So you had all of this was Sudan. This part was predominantly Muslim. Your Christians and your traditional African religion people were down here. So after that big war that took place in this country, they eventually separated it out. And then right here, this little orangey color one, South Sudan, that's going to be your newest country in Africa. But let's go on to page 650. I'm trying to turn in my book. And you're going to see this page, Sudan refugees. There's that word again, refugees, and displacement. Displacement means that you've been moved out of place. Okay, you've been displaced, moved out of place. All right, so 2011, we have a new country, South Sudan, and I'm going to start right here because this says pretty much what we already read. Right here where it says violence continues. When South Sudan became an independent country on July 9th, 2011, many people hoped to start a new peaceful life. However, several violent conflicts broke out, including continued conflict in Darfur. So let me show you, I know I keep going back and forth, to this map. There we go. When they say Darfur, they're talking about right here. So remember, this is going to be Sudan. This is going to be South Sudan. Darfur is this region right along over here. Okay, so when I say that down here, you'll know that I'm talking about a region within Sudan. Okay, so conflict in Darfur. So Darfur is this region in Western Sudan. In 2003, rebel groups, right up here, rebel groups rose up against the Sudanese government. The rebels demanded that the government stop its unjust social and economic policies. Well, this is how the government reacted. Instead of, saying, oh, let's talk about it, let's try to work things out, the government reacted right here by raiding and burning villages. In the long conflict that followed, thousands were killed and many were forced out of their home. Okay, so they were displaced. When they're forced from their home, they are displaced. Refugees are fleeing. Displaced people have been forced from their homes. So refugees and IDPs, that's where I'm going to be talking about that, IDPs. So refugees are people who have left their country because they're in danger or have been victims of persecution. A major problem also exists with internally displaced persons. An IDP is someone who's forced to flee because of danger, but they remain in their own country. We don't see that here in America. The closest thing that I could try to help you understand that would be to say, like during Hurricane Katrina, we had people that moved to Texas from Louisiana because they were displaced. Their homes had been destroyed by the hurricane and they had nowhere to go, but they were still living in America. Okay, so that's sort of give you an idea of what an IDP is. Someone who still lives within their country, okay, but they had to leave their home because of danger. So, and I don't have the next page on here. It shows you a picture of some people in South Sudan who are moving to a new refugee camp. So a refugee camp is going to be an area that has been set up for these refugees or for these IDPs to live in. And essentially what it is, a refugee camp is like a tent city. There's just rows and rows of tents. And those people are happy to have it because they literally have nothing else except what they can carry from the home that they're trying to escape. What you're going to do now is you're going to watch this video called Kids in Camps. And it's a documentary over some actual people who live in refugee camps. And I know you see all the yellow dots. That means those are commercials. And I just couldn't find a better free video for you to see what these people really have to live like when they are refugees or when they are IDPs, displaced persons. So I want you to watch this, and you won't finish it. You won't finish this Kids in Camp documentary. But if you choose to finish it tomorrow, you can either choose to finish it or you can choose to finish that video that was about South Africa and following the lives of the people in South Africa. They're both very interesting. They're both going to teach you a lot. But I want you to watch this one today as much as you can. And then tomorrow you can either choose to finish this one or you can choose to finish the other one. You won't have time to finish both. No one can finish everything that I've left this week within, the time you have in class. All right. So this is a very depressing topic. It seems like everything we've talked about with Africa has kind of been depressing. We talked about slavery. We've talked about how the British government came and took control of a lot of areas in North Africa and in South Africa. We've talked about apartheid, and we've talked about refugees and displacement. There's just a lot of sadness that surrounds Africa. There's a lot of poverty. You think, well, why don't these people just move and go somewhere else? Well, they're poor. They don't have the money to do it. They can't just up and leave. So it's a very sad situation for a lot of people in Africa. Okay, and I hope you keep that in mind as you watch this Kids in Camp documentary. Okay, so when this video is over, you'll go back into Google Classroom and you will watch this video.